When Giselle called, she didn't ask. She informed. "We've booked Hawaii," she said, her voice clipped and breezy like it always was when she was pretending to be casual. "Thorne and I need a break. You'll stay here with Nomi." There was no pause, no question mark. Just a pause for my assent. I hesitated. "I have appointments next week." "She won't be any trouble," Giselle cut in. "She doesn't talk. Doesn't move much either. Her nurse canceled last minute and, well, family steps up, right?" I glanced at the framed photo on my mantel, me Thorne and Nomi from 3 Christmases ago. She'd looked so small in his arms. Blank-faced, yes, but not hollow. Something about her eyes had lingered in my memory. "I suppose I could," I said slowly, even as I felt that familiar pressure building behind my ribs, for a few days. "Wonderful," she chirped. "We'll leave the Tahoe for you. There's a binder on the kitchen counter with everything." By the time I arrived the next morning, their bags were lined by the door, expensive luggage gleaming like showroom props. Giselle greeted me in oversized sunglasses, kissed the air near my cheek, and handed me a sleek matte black key fob like she was passing off a luxury rental. Thorne hugged me tighter than I expected, but said little. "She eats at 6, Giselle said, slipping on her heels. "Meds are labeled. Don't miss a dose." Of what I asked, but she was already calling for the driver. Nomi sat silently in a reclining wheelchair near the front window, her head turned toward the glass, unmoving. Her brown curls were tied back too tightly, and her sweater was buttoned up to her chin despite the sun. "She's fine," Giselle added without looking back. "Just keep her on her schedule. She sleeps a lot. There's nothing to do. Nothing to do." That's what they always said about children who didn't speak. When the door finally closed behind them and I was left alone in the massive white foyer, I exhaled slowly. The quiet felt unnatural, stretched tight. I looked up and saw the first camera nestled in the corner of the ceiling, its black lens blinking red. I hadn't been in the kitchen 10 minutes. The marble countertops were cold under my palms as I looked over the binder Giselle had left. Color-coded tabs, medication logs, meal plans, emergency contacts all routed through her private cell. Not a pediatrician or therapist in sight. I opened the fridge. Row upon row of plastic bottles labeled nutritional formula, Nomi. Sterile, engineered, lifeless. I put a pot of water on the stove for pasta. The house was too quiet. Even with the television humming faintly in the background, a children's program set to autoplay, it felt wrong, like something waiting to break. I spoke aloud, mostly to ease the silence. "All right, kiddo. I'm going to make some dinner. You're probably not hungry, but I'll get your shake ready too." I turned to grab a spoon from the drawer and froze. Nomi was standing in the kitchen doorway. No wheelchair, no tremors, no blank stare. She stood barefoot, holding onto the frame with one hand, her shoulders small but steady hair slightly mussed. Her eyes met mine, not glazed or confused, but bright. Aware. I couldn't move, could barely breathe, her lips parted. And in a voice that sounded like any other 7-year-old girl, soft and frightened, she said, "They want my 4 million. Please help." The wooden spoon slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a thud. Nomi flinched. I knelt slowly, my pulse hammering. "What did you say, sweetheart?" She looked behind her, then back at me. "Please don't tell them I talked to you. They'll hurt me again." Her voice was clearer this time. Still trembling, but articulate. Her words landed like stones. "I won't tell." I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But can you walk?" She gave the smallest nod. Her fingers gripped the doorframe tighter. "They don't know I can anymore," she whispered. "I only do it when they're gone. You're the first one they left me alone with." 1,000 thoughts rushed in: legal implications, medical fraud, trauma, lies. But I pushed them aside. I held out my hand. and together we crossed the kitchen floor one careful step at a time. We sat at the kitchen table, the pot of water long forgotten, the burner still glowing faintly beneath it. Nomi's hands stayed close to her chest, fingers curled tight as though expecting to be yanked away at any moment. I didn't press her. I just waited. After a while, she whispered, "It started after Granny and Pops died." I glanced up. They were my dad's parents. We lived with them after he left. Then, the car crash. Her lips trembled. After that, Mommy said I was sick. She paused, looked down at her hands. She said I got hit in the head in the accident, that I needed rest. Medicine. I leaned forward slowly. "What kind of medicine, sweetheart?" She shrugged. "White powder in water, always bitter, sometimes pink pills. They make my legs feel like jelly. My head, slow, like dreaming but not sleeping." I clenched my fists beneath the table. And if I didn't take them, she continued, she would pinch me or lock me in the red closet. It's always cold in there. She lifted her left sleeve. Tiny yellow-green bruises patterned her forearm like fading stamps. My breath caught in my throat. I reached gently across and touched her wrist so lightly she could pull away if she wanted. She didn't. She told people I was born like this, she said. But I remember talking, running. I used to sing in the car, before the medicine. "Why now?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "You looked at me," she said simply. "You said my name like I was real." Nomi slid off the chair and padded toward the hallway. I followed her to her room, sterile, hospital-like, with locking drawers and no toys in sight. She knelt beside the bed, reached under the mattress, and pulled out a worn, spiral notebook wrapped in a faded dish towel. Inside were pages of blocky handwriting, dates, names, descriptions of pills, places she was hidden, things they said when they thought she couldn't hear. I sat beside her on the floor and turned the pages slowly. She had written herself a voice, and someone had to listen. After I tucked Nomi into bed that night, no pills, just warm milk, and her favorite page in the notebook left open beside her, I returned to the kitchen to study the binder Giselle had left behind. It sat like a manual on parenting, a stranger, all laminated pages and color-coded tabs. The medication schedule listed dosages for heavy sedatives I recognized from my years in speech therapy, drugs meant for serious neurological disorders, not daily use in a child with no official diagnosis. The feeding chart was more rigid than any hospital protocol I'd ever seen, dictating down to the minute when and what she should consume. And every emergency contact from doctors to preferred specialists routed back to one number, Giselle's private cell. I took the binder with me to the office. It was a cold, modern room, all chrome and high-gloss surfaces, more showroom than workspace. I searched drawers methodically, but the one on the bottom right refused to budge. "She keeps the key under the gray vase," Nomi had whispered earlier. I found the vase, weighted and ornamental, and tipped it gently. Sure enough, taped beneath it was a tiny silver key. The lock clicked open. Inside a neat row of folders, each labeled in Giselle's tidy, emotionless print. I pulled out the first one. Trust. Envy. My stomach tightened. It was a trust document naming Nomi as sole beneficiary of a multi-million-dollar inheritance left by her paternal grandparents. Giselle, as legal guardian, had control until Nomi turned 18. But only if Nomi was deemed competent. The second folder held a psychological evaluation already stamped and signed, describing Nomi as nonverbal, intellectually delayed, and incapable of managing her affairs for life. The recommendation long-term guardianship and power of attorney assigned permanently to Giselle. The third folder was worse, a court petition for full legal incapacity, awaiting submission. All it needed was a hearing date. I set the papers down with shaking hands and looked back at the silver key resting in my palm. There was nothing accidental about Nomi's silence. And something told me this was only the beginning, The next morning, Nomi led me to a closet at the end of the guest hallway, just outside Giselle's bedroom. She pointed to a large floor-length mirror bolted to the wall. She hides stuff behind it. She whispered, eyes darting toward the ceiling camera. We'd already mapped out the blind spots this one included. The mirror wasn't decorative. It was a disguised door. I ran my fingers along the edges and found a magnetic latch. With a soft click, it opened inward to reveal a recessed panel set into the wall. A digital keypad blinked, waiting. I looked down at Nomi. Do you know the code? She shook her head. But Mommy uses birthdays a lot. I tried Giselle's. Nothing. Then I entered Nomi's. The light turned green. Inside was a fireproof box, several stacks of documents, and a thin velvet envelope tied with twine. I pulled it all out, sat cross-legged on the carpet, and opened the envelope first. Inside were 3 letters handwritten. Crisp and careful, 2 addressed to Nomi. One meant to be opened at her 21st birthday. All were signed by her paternal grandparents. They weren't just fond farewells. They were instructions. The final letter mentioned a second trust separate from the $4 million account. A larger estate, once private shares in an energy company, had been liquidated shortly before their deaths. The result was a trust worth nearly $15 million hidden from Giselle by design. But with a release clause, it would only transfer to Nomi if she was found mentally competent by independent evaluation at age 21, and if she still retained control over the initial trust. If she didn't, the money would revert to a foundation completely out of Giselle's reach. The court filings in the office drawer made sense now. The psychological report, the fake diagnoses, the medication. The $4 million was bait, but the real prize, the one worth faking a disability, drugging a child, and orchestrating years of isolation, was sitting quietly in this safe. I looked at Nomi, who sat beside me, tracing a finger over the corner of one letter. They don't know about this one, she said. Not yet, I thought. Not yet. It was Nomi who pointed them out first. That one watches me when I sleep, she said, nodding toward the vent above her bed. I climbed onto a chair and looked closer. Hidden behind the slats was a miniature lens no larger than a button, but blinking faintly red. The hallway had 2 more placed just above eye level, angled perfectly toward her room. The cameras weren't part of a baby monitor system. They were permanent, professional, and wired directly into a central server. I found tucked inside a closet labeled HVAC. The monitor was password protected, but Nomi watched Giselle type it so many times she remembered it. It's her name and his, she said, pointing to a small notepad. Giselle Paolo 23. I typed it in. The interface loaded instantly, footage categorized by date and room. I clicked through the archived videos. Most showed Nomi exactly as expected, unmoving, silent, draped in blankets, like she'd given up. But in between, there were gaps, brief jumps in the timestamps. Segments were missing. Where are those parts, I asked. They delete things, Nomi murmured. When I slip up. In one surviving clip, she flinched when a nurse dropped a tray. In another, she reached for a pencil too quickly. Then, a skip. I didn't need more proof. I hid my phone between the books on Giselle's desk and began recording. First Nomi reading from her notebook, then her describing the medicine, the closet, the bruises. I asked her to say her name, her age, where she lived. She did all 3 without hesitation. Next, I opened Giselle's email. Among bills and fake medical invoices, I found a folder titled Personal, Delete. Inside were exchanges between her and someone named Paolo D. They read like plans between lovers, not parents. He called her Bella. She promised him the money would come once the judge signed off. They weren't just drugging Nomi. They were planning to leave. I backed everything up on my cloud account, using a burner email I hadn't touched in years. Nomi watched me quietly. They won't like this, she said. I looked at her and smiled. That's the point, sweetheart. The sound of the front door unlocking jolted me from a half-sleep on the living room sofa. I blinked at the clock, 3:02 a.m. The family wasn't due back for another 30 hours. My body moved before my brain caught up. I ran down the hall and found Nomi already sitting up in bed, her eyes wide in the dark. They're early, she whispered, voice shaking. Sometimes they do that. To check. We moved fast. She climbed back into the medical bed, her legs tucked stiffly beneath the blankets. I adjusted the straps loosely over her ankles and turned off the lamp. She lay still, eyes open, expression blank. The cameras blinked silently above us. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Giselle's voice pierced the quiet. Why is she flushed? She snapped, entering the room. Why are her lips moving? She had a mild fever last night, I said evenly. I recorded everything in the log. She didn't speak. I handed her a fabricated entry sheet, backdated vitals notes about drowsiness, a scribbled reminder to call her pediatrician if the temperature spiked. Giselle scanned the page, jaw tight. She said nothing and turned to Nomi. Well, she said, leaning in. Any surprises while we were gone? Nomi blinked slowly. Nothing else. Giselle scoffed and left the room. I helped Nomi sit up once the door shut. We didn't speak. By morning, the house buzzed with suitcases, hangover yawns, and muttered instructions. Robert and Thorne were unpacking downstairs. Giselle was back on her phone. Nomi stood in the hallway looking toward the kitchen. Now, she asked. I nodded once. She walked fully confidently into the kitchen where Giselle stood pouring coffee. Mommy Nomi said clearly. Giselle turned. You said I was broken. Nomi said, her voice strong. I'm not. The mug slipped from Giselle's hand and shattered against the tile. A crash, a gasp, footsteps. Thorne stepped in from the hallway and froze. Nomi didn't flinch. She turned to face them all as the silence spread like smoke. I stood beside her, still and steady, as the weight of her words settled into the walls. Giselle didn't scream. Not at first. She just stared at Nomi as if trying to reprogram what she'd heard. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. You're confused, she said. You're having one of your episodes. Let's get your medicine. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small amber bottle. No, Nomi said firmly. That was when Giselle lunged. I stepped between them before the bottle reached her lips. Don't touch her. Robert entered, just then, his voice sharp. What the hell is going on? She's faking, Giselle snapped. You saw it. She's manipulating. This isn't real. Nomi shrank back against me. I reached for my phone. Robert's eyes tracked the movement instantly. Give me that. He stepped forward, arm outstretched. I moved back, pressing the side button twice. The signal triggered the app Juniper had installed for me, a silent SOS. You're making a mistake, Robert growled. You don't understand what you've walked into. I understand perfectly, I said. And so will the people waiting outside. The doorbell rang. Giselle froze mid-step. Robert's shoulders stiffened. When I opened the door, Juniper stood with 2 plainclothes officers and a caseworker from CPS. Her expression was calm, professional. Good morning, she said to Robert. I believe you've been expecting us. Robert's face twitched. This is a private matter. No, Juniper replied. This is a child protection case, and my client has evidence. Thorne stepped into view from behind the staircase. His eyes darted between his wife, his daughter, and me. Thorne, Giselle said quickly, she's manipulating all of us. This was Paolo's idea. I didn't plan any of it. Who's Paolo Thorne? Asked, voice shaking. A colleague, she blurted. Robert stepped forward. We can resolve this. Privately. There's no need to drag everyone into a mess. You already did, I said. Now it's time to clean it up. The CPS worker approached Nomi, gently, kneeling. Can you talk to me, sweetheart? Nomi nodded, then whispered. They tried to make me forget who I am. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was judgment, cracking through marble floors and expensive silence, making way for something new. 3 weeks later, I sat stiffly in a wooden bench beneath fluorescent lights as the judge called Nomi's name. She wasn't seated beside me. She was in a separate chamber with 2 licensed evaluators, specialists from the state. No parents, no lawyers, just professionals trained to see through rehearsed scripts and manipulation. Juniper sat at my side, calm as ever. The opposing table was emptier than expected. Giselle had declined to appear, choosing instead to stay in a private facility where her attorney claimed she was undergoing emotional treatment. Robert was present, though gray-faced and sour, his posture stiff, his gaze distant. The psychologist's report was clear. Nomi Vale demonstrates age-appropriate cognitive functioning. Her communication skills are intact. There is no evidence of intellectual disability or developmental regression. The judge's face remained neutral, but I saw the tiniest shift in posture, the kind that tells you something just tipped. Next came the trust manager from the bank, confirming that both Nomi's current $4 million and the extended $15 million trust had been frozen pending reassignment of guardianship and investigation into financial misconduct. Juniper handed over a thumb drive containing digital logs, audio clips, camera footage, and the archived emails between Giselle and Paolo. Included was a recording of Robert offering to handle the situation quietly for everyone's sake, which had been caught during the CPS interview. When Thorne took the stand, I didn't know what to expect. He looked nervous, small. But when asked where his loyalty stood, he said simply, "With my daughter, and with the woman who protected her when I didn't." The judge gave his ruling before we left the chamber. Temporary guardianship of Nomi would be assigned to me, pending further review. Giselle was to remain under investigation for child abuse and financial fraud. Robert's license to practice finance was suspended indefinitely. A formal trial would follow. Outside the courtroom, Nomi ran up to me and held on tight. Her face was quiet, but her arms clung with the certainty of someone choosing safety. I held her close and whispered, "We go home now." 3 months passed like seasons, shifting gradual at first, then all at once. The air in our little house felt warmer, fuller. Nomi now had a backpack covered in keychains, a lunchbox she'd picked out herself, and 2 friends who screamed her name across the playground each morning like it was magic. She spoke easily now, to teachers, to strangers. She asked for seconds. She laughed at jokes. Sometimes she even interrupted me mid-sentence with a confident, "Wait, I have an idea." The first time she called me Graham, I had to excuse myself to the laundry room, where I cried into a towel. Every morning before school, we stood in front of the mirror and practiced one sentence she came up with on her own. "I can say what I need." One night, after reading 2 chapters of the book, she chose from the library, a real one, not curated fluff. I kissed her forehead and rose to turn off the light. She caught my wrist gently. "I think I'm not scared anymore," she whispered. I sat down beside her and ran my fingers through her hair. "Even brave people get scared," I said, "but they don't let it stop them." She nodded and pulled the covers to her chin. Her eyes drifted shut within seconds, her breathing steady. A kind of peace lived in her face now, like someone who had finally stepped into their own skin. After I closed her door, I walked to the kitchen and opened the folder on the table. Inside were flyers for a new advocacy initiative, a pilot program focused on recognizing and reporting signs of medical abuse in minors. I had agreed to be one of the founding board members. It wasn't just about Nomi anymore. There were others, hidden in homes that looked perfect from the outside. invisible behind cameras and prescriptions and silence. I couldn't save them all, but I could help light the path. Some people break silence with a scream. Nomi did it with a whisper.